What I'm about to express here might appear to be radical or even mind-bending to some, especially to those who are deeply rooted or programmed by religion. All I ask is that no matter from which perspective you come, that you do your own introspection to reach the truth. Do not take any of this mere material at face value without asking plenty of questions. Always be skeptical. Likewise, don't quickly judge and dismiss this material, or any ideas for that matter, without keeping an open mind to new ideas. The first time I read the Bible from cover to cover, I was left with more questions than answers. The biggest one being, why is the God of the Old Testament so judging, fear-driven, and power-hungry, and the God of the New Testament all loving, forgiving, and humble? Now, if Jesus was God incarnate, or if that's too far for you, his quote-unquote representative, then why wasn't he leading his disciples into battle against the Pharisees, Sadducees, and Romans, and slaughtering them by the thousands? Why wasn't he sacrificing baby animals, spilling their blood on an altar, and burning their flesh for a God above? Why would the God of the Old Testament say an eye for an eye and Jesus say to turn the other cheek? What I'm proposing here is that the God of the Old Testament, the God of Abraham, is a demigod and not the true creator God himself. I'm not going as far as saying that he's Lucifer or a devil, but an entity with similar motivations. He's often referred to as Yahweh or Jehovah. Why is it that Jehovah's Witnesses insist that Jehovah is God's real name and that we should only use that name? Would he somehow be offended if we didn't? If we would just keep an open mind, we would know that once we slap a label on God's name, if he even has a name, we introduce limitation. As in my previous article, God is bigger than a name. He, she is bigger than all of our religions and interpretations. He, she is within each and every one of us. So this doesn't mean that religions that strictly pray to Jehovah or Yahweh will never be heard by the true creator God. God hears all voices and is within each and every one of us, no matter from which religious influence we've been raised. Each person is on their own unique path back to the one true source. Okay, back to my point about this Yahweh character. Why is it that the three of the most rich, powerful, patriarchal, and influential religions have been behind some of the world's bloodiest battles in history? Have you ever noticed that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam have all stemmed from the same source? They're all rooted from the sons of Abraham, influenced by the God of Abraham. This has huge implications on the way in which people and nations have been gripped in conflict over the years. I'm sure you might be aware of the story of Abraham being ordered by his demigod to sacrifice his son to prove his obedience. Luckily, he didn't have to go all the way, but it was Abraham's offspring, led by Yahweh, who did go ahead and spill the blood of thousands upon thousands for some promised land. Now, I'm not trying to pick on these three religions here. The true deception runs through many, if not all, religions. This is not to say that religions are evil and wrong. They're all extremely beautiful in their cultures, ceremonies, and traditions, and we need to honor and respect that. Once we remove the layers of deception, we'll be able to see the truth a lot clearer. There have been a game of divide and conquer, which has been playing out for millennia. Alright, let me share with you a vision that I had. I was sitting in my office one afternoon. I just asked to know the truth about this idea of Yahweh as demigod. Usually the answers come to me later in the form of a dream or through a series of synchronistic events. This time it kind of hit me all at once. The walls of my office began to tremble and break apart, as if we were having an earthquake. But it wasn't an earthquake. The veil of this reality was lifting, allowing me to see into another. In an instant, the building in which I was sitting shattered into a myriad of tiny fragments and was blown apart by a tremendous wind like that of a hurricane. When the debris cleared, I was left standing and looking out upon a luminescent landscape. It was so bright that I could barely make out my surroundings. A brilliant light was emanating from some unseen source ahead of me. Gale force winds were rushing in my face. The light and the wind seemed to be entwined in a way, as if they were one and the same. A torrent of emotions rushed at me, carried by the winds. I felt a strong, masculine presence. It felt arrogant, bold, enormous, and powerful. But beneath all of that, I felt a layer of fear, like the fear of a child. It was afraid of losing its power. A voice thundered from the distance. It was repeating some phrase over and over in an unfamiliar language. The voice was low and loud and gripping. It shook the landscape, causing the emanating light to brighten and the winds to get stronger. I began to walk forward. Debris tumbled past, probably the remains of my 3D reality. Ghostly white linens, which appeared to be strung out across the landscape, flapped wildly in the winds and obstructed my view. The force grew more resistant the further I walked. Then I saw him. On the horizon, there stood a huge glowing figure. The force was emanating from his luminous body. He was literally swollen with power, that it was pouring out of him in gusts and explosions like solar eruptions. I couldn't make out any facial features, but I thought I saw horns on his head like a minotaur. Standing there, I knew without a doubt that this glowing, swollen beast was Yahweh. With this knowing, the booming voice thundered again. This time I understood. He was saying something like, "I am Yahweh," over and over. Huge tendrils of light connected between his body and thousands of people around the world like feeding tubes. Staring out at this monster, I knew that he'd not always been this way. He used to be beautiful, but his greed for power had become his demise. Now he's at a point of no return. He feeds on the creator source power from within each of us, as we've been programmed for so long to just give it away. We've been programmed to await a savior to arrive from without, when this true savior will arise from within. In a flash, I was back in my office, sitting at my desk. Nothing was out of place. I thought it was all over, when all of a sudden my body was overtaken with a surge of energy. Yahweh had seen me, watching, and had reached through my vision and charged me with his power. Now I understood how this power can be addictive. I felt for an instant invincible. But I have always been trained to live by my own internal source, seed of God if you will, and not to trust that which comes from without. Before I knew it, I had been pulled back into my vision. Yahweh was standing closer. He was looking directly at me with his featureless face. I spread out my arms and called upon the kingdom of heaven to shine from within. All of the love and life of all creation rose up from within and shone outwards. The invading energy left immediately. All ties to that force had been severed. I was returned to my office in an instant. It was over. My body was drained, and I felt sick. After that experience, I knew that I needed to share what I had seen. It's so important that we no longer give away our power to greedy vampire entities such as this. Now, I'd been toying with the idea as Yahweh as demigod for some time now, but ever since this experience, I know without a doubt that this entity should be avoided at all costs unless it's within one's journey to experience this kind of power and control. Now, I believe that these experiences of deception have an important part to play in our development to becoming fully fledged humans. This is all just a temporary stage, and we need to go through and honor that. But now, we're at a point where it's time we wake up and take our power back. When seeking enlightenment or knowledge or peace or unifying consciousness, always look within yourself and don't rely on that which comes from without. Remember that the kingdom of heaven, or truth if you will, comes from within, not without. Use your heart and mind and gut to discern any of these outside influences, be it a spirit, an angel, an ET, or even the stranger that you meet in the streets. Learn to discern. If it feels wrong, get out. Nothing can stand in your way or take you over if it's against your will. As for this Yahweh guy, I don't feel any anger or pity or fear. My emotions no longer feed into this game, a game which is coming to its end. I know that. He knows that. God knows that. This is not a crusade against evil. It's merely a revealing of truth. As for the rest of us who've woken up to this truth already, we need to be grateful for this experience and move on. All have their part to play. Now it's time you do yours.